I didn't say a word. That's the part people don't understand when I tell this story. They expect me to say I yelled. They expect me to say I grabbed the table, knocked over a glass, pointed a finger in someone's face. But I didn't do any of that. I just looked at her, looked at my son's wife, standing there in the middle of a room full of people, and I said nothing. Then I stood up, folded my napkin on the table the way my mother taught me 60 years ago, and I walked out. What happened after that is what I want to tell you about. But first, let me take you back, because none of it makes sense unless you understand what that cabin meant to me, what that land meant to me, and what I thought I was building when I raised my son. My name is Thomas. I'm 64 years old. I spent 31 years working as a Finnish carpenter, crown molding, cabinetry, hardwood floors, the kind of detailed trim work that takes patience most people don't have anymore. I wasn't famous. I didn't own a big company, but I was good at what I did, and I saved carefully. And when my son Daniel was 6 years old, I bought 11.5 acres on the eastern edge of a small lake in western Virginia. The price was low because nobody wanted land that far from the main road. But I stood there on a Tuesday afternoon in October, with leaves coming down around me and a slice of light hitting the water just right, and I knew this was it. This was where I was going to build something that would last. I didn't hire it out. That would have defeated the purpose. Every board went up by my own hands. My father-in-law helped me pour the foundation one summer. My brother drove up from North Carolina 2 weekends in a row to help me frame the walls. My wife, Margaret, God rest her, she kept our son occupied so I could work, and on Saturdays she'd bring lunch out in a cooler and sit on an overturned bucket and talk to me while I nailed siding. We were married 29 years before she passed. The cabin was already finished by then, but I've never stopped thinking of it as ours. It took me 4 years to build. I finished it the summer Daniel turned 10. He was there the day I put in the last window, a big picture window on the south wall that looks straight down to the water. He pressed both his small hands flat against the glass and fogged it with his breath and said, "Dad, are we rich?" I laughed until my sides hurt. Then I picked him up and told him no, we weren't rich, but we had something better. We had a place. He grew up spending summers there. He learned to fish off that dock. He took his first kayak trip on that lake. He had his first serious girlfriend there when he was 17. I pretended not to notice when they sat too close on the porch. When Margaret got sick, we took her out there for the last good summer she had, and she sat wrapped in a quilt in the Adirondack chair I built her and watched the water and said it was enough, that it was all enough. The cabin was appraised at $420,000 2 years ago. I mention that not to boast, but because it's relevant to what happened later. The land had appreciated significantly. There'd been development pressure in that county for years, and a resort developer had already sent me 2 letters asking if I'd consider selling. I hadn't answered either one. The answer was no, and it would always be no. My son Daniel is 33. He's a project manager for a mid-sized construction firm in Richmond. He's a good man, thoughtful, calm, has his mother's patience and her eyes. I was proud of him. I'm still proud of him, even after everything. That's important to say clearly. I never stopped being proud of my son. He met Nicole at a work conference in Charlotte 3 years ago. She was in commercial real estate leasing, development, that side of things. Sharp woman, organized. She knew how to read a room. When Daniel brought her home the first time, she said all the right things about the cabin. She said the woodwork was beautiful, which it is. She said the view was stunning, which it is. She asked intelligent questions about the acreage and the shoreline rights, and I remember thinking, this one's curious and smart. I liked her. I want to be honest about that too. I liked her for a long time. They got engaged 18 months later. Daniel called me on a Sunday evening. Voice lit up the way it gets when he can't contain himself, and told me he'd proposed at a restaurant in Richmond and she'd said yes. I told him I was happy for him. I was. I meant it without reservation. The wedding planning started immediately. Nicole was thorough. She had a spreadsheet for the guest list, a timeline for every vendor, a dedicated folder for every decision. Daniel told me she'd already selected a venue, a restored estate in Albemarle County. Beautiful place, 220 guests. The cost was substantial, more than substantial. I offered to contribute what I could, And I did. I wrote a check for $15,000, which was not nothing for a retired man living on savings and a small pension. But somewhere in the months that followed, something shifted. I couldn't name it at the time. It was small things, the kind of things you tell yourself you're imagining. Nicole stopped asking about my plans for the cabin and started stating them. When you eventually sell, you should get a good price for it. When I eventually sell, Daniel and I were talking about whether we'd want to hold on to that kind of property long term, Daniel and I, as if the question of what I did with my land was already a joint decision that included her. I didn't say anything the first time, or the second. I told myself it was nerves, or that real estate was her profession, and she just spoke that way about property, and that she didn't mean anything by it. Then, about 2 months before the wedding, Daniel called me. He seemed uncomfortable. He got to the point eventually. Nicole had suggested that, as a wedding gift, a gift I might consider transferring the deed of the cabin property into their names. Not all of it, he said quickly. Just to have it in the family, you know, Dad. Secure it for the future. I was quiet for a long moment. Then I told my son calmly that the cabin was not a gift I was in a position to give, that it was my primary asset, that I lived there a significant portion of the year, and that when the time came, he would inherit it, but that time was not now, and it was not for his wife to determine when that time arrived. Daniel went quiet. He said he understood. He said he'd talk to her. He apologized, and I believed the apology was real. I thought the matter was closed. The rehearsal dinner was held on a Friday evening at a private room in a restaurant in Charlottesville. 40 people, family and close friends, round tables with candles, the kind of warm room that should have felt like a celebration. I sat at a table with my brother, my sister-in-law, and 2 of Daniel's oldest friends from high school. Nicole's family occupied the tables near the front, her parents, 2 sisters, an aunt and uncle, and a small cluster of her friends from the real estate world. I noticed them early. I noticed the way they looked at me, which was the way people look at a piece of property they're appraising. The dinner was lovely. The food was good. Daniel gave a short toast that made everyone laugh and his mother's sister cry. I gave mine. I talked about Margaret, about the lake, about the boy who pressed his hands against a window and asked if we were rich. People laughed at that too, and I saw Daniel smile, the smile I remembered from when he was small. Then dessert arrived, and Nicole's father stood up and gave his toast, which was perfectly fine, and sat down. And then Nicole stood up. She held her wine glass, and she smiled at the room, and the first 2 minutes of what she said were normal, gracious, even. She thanked people for coming. She talked about how Daniel was the most patient man she'd ever met. She said she was looking forward to building a life with him. Then she set her wine glass down. She turned and looked directly at me. "Thomas," she said, "using my name the way a person does when they want to signal authority over you, I'd like to take a moment to make this official, in front of everyone who matters to both of us." She reached into the small clutch bag on the back of her chair and produced a folded set of papers. "I have the deed transfer documents here. All you need to do is sign where it's flagged. We can do it right now." The room went quiet in that specific way. Rooms go quiet when something has gone wrong. I looked at the papers in her hand. I looked at my son. Daniel's face had gone the color of old chalk. His jaw was slightly open. He had not known this was coming, and I saw that clearly, and it mattered to me later. I looked back at Nicole. "No," I said. That was all. Just no. Her smile didn't disappear. It adjusted. Became a different kind of smile. "Thomas, I think if you understood the financial advantages of this kind of transfer tax implications. Estate planning. Protecting the asset within the family." "No," I said again. "Dad." That was Daniel, low and urgent. "Maybe we should. This isn't the time." "I agree," I said. "This isn't the time. This was never the time." Nicole set the papers down on the table in front of her. She tilted her head. "You've been sitting on that property for 30 years, doing nothing with it. The land alone is worth." "I know what it's worth," I said. "Then you know that transferring it now makes every kind of sense." Her voice had gone flatter. The social warmth drained out of it. "Daniel is your son. I'm going to be his wife tomorrow. What you'd be doing is securing your family's future. I'm not signing tonight, I said. I'm not signing tomorrow. I'm not signing any time in the near future, and I'll ask you not to bring this up again. The pause that followed felt very long. Then Nicole said something I will not repeat here, not because I don't remember it, but because it was designed to wound, and I have no interest in giving it more weight than it deserves. She said it quietly enough that most of the room didn't hear the exact words, but she said it directly at me, and the people closest to our table heard it. My brother heard it. He told me afterward his first instinct was to stand up, but I was already standing. I folded my napkin. I set it on the table beside my dessert plate. I pushed in my chair. I said to no one in particular, "Good night," and I walked out. I sat in my truck in the parking lot for about 10 minutes. The October air was cold and clear. I could see a slice of the blue ridge through the gap between two buildings, the ridge dark against a sky with stars just starting to show. I thought about Margaret. I thought about the first time she drove up to that land with me, before we'd even broken ground. Just standing there in the tall grass looking at the water, and she'd taken my hand without saying anything. Then I took out my phone and I made a call. My oldest friend in this world is a man named Gerald. He's 67, semi-retired, and for the last 32 years he has been a real estate attorney in the state of Virginia. We went to the same high school. We were in each other's weddings. He helped me with the original property purchase, back when we were both young men with more energy than sense, and when Margaret died, he drove 4 hours each way to be at the funeral. I trust Gerald the way I trust my own hands. He picked up on the third ring. I told him what had happened. There was a silence on his end. Then he said, in the voice he uses when he is shifting from friend to professional without stopping being either, "Tom, where are you right now?" I told him. "How soon can you drive to my office?" I looked at the restaurant. Through the window, I could see the warm light, the silhouettes of people still at their tables. "Now," I said. What I did that night at Gerald's office took about 2 hours and involved documents I'd been meaning to deal with for years and had simply kept postponing. Gerald had been nudging me about it for some time. The events of that evening had, as he put it dryly, clarified the timeline. I won't go into every detail, but the short version is this. By 11:30 that night, the 11.5 acres and the cabin I had built with my own hands were placed into an irrevocable trust. The beneficiaries were my son and, if he ever had children, his children after him. The terms of the trust were specific. The property could not be sold, transferred, liquidated, or encumbered without a trustee's approval during my lifetime, and after my death it passed intact to Daniel for his use and enjoyment, not for sale, not for development. Held in the family for a minimum of 25 years. If he chose not to use it, it would pass to any grandchildren I might have. A property held in a properly structured irrevocable trust is, from a legal standpoint, no longer an asset that can be seized in a divorce proceeding, leveraged against debts, or transferred by a spouse acting unilaterally. Gerald explained this to me carefully, and then he looked at me over the top of his reading glasses, the way he's been doing since we were 16 years old, and he said, "You understand what this means if that marriage hits trouble someday?" I told him I understood. He asked if I was sure. I told him I'd never been more sure of anything since I put in that last window. He smiled a little at that, and we shook hands, and I drove back to the motel I'd booked for the wedding weekend, and I slept better than I had in months. The wedding was the next day. I'll admit I considered not going. I sat on the edge of the motel bed at 7 in the morning, and I held that option in my mind for a while, turning it over. I could have driven home. I could have skipped the whole thing and called Daniel later and explained. Part of me wanted to, but I thought about my son standing at the altar. I thought about how whatever was wrong here, whatever this woman was or wasn't, Daniel loved her, and the day was his as much as it was hers. And I thought about Margaret, who would have put on her best dress and gone anyway, who always said you show up for the people you love, even when it costs you something. So I put on my suit, the good navy one I'd bought for my daughter-in-law's predecessor's funeral 3 years ago, repurposed now for better use, and I drove to the venue. Nicole looked beautiful. I want to say that honestly. She wore a gown that suited her exactly, and she walked with the composure of someone who was very good at controlling a room. She did not look at me during the ceremony. Daniel looked at me once, near the beginning, a long look from across the aisle, and I nodded at him. His shoulders lowered about an inch. He looked forward again. The ceremony was beautiful. Whatever else I felt that day, I will not take that away from it. The vows were personal and specific, and when Daniel's voice caught during his, I felt it in the center of my chest. I sat through dinner. I danced once with my sister-in-law. I was pleasant to the relatives I hadn't met and warm to the ones I had. Nicole did not approach me, and I did not approach her. Her family watched me from across the room the way they'd watched me the night before, and I let them watch. An hour before the reception ended, Daniel found me at the table where I'd been sitting with my brother. He sat down across from me. He looked exhausted in the way people look when they've been holding too much for too long. "I didn't know she was going to do that last night," he said. "I need you to know that." "I know," I told him. "I could see it on your face." He rubbed the back of his neck. "She told me she'd figured out the perfect way to ask. She said she had it handled." He exhaled. "She didn't tell me what she actually had planned." I nodded. Are we okay?" he asked. I reached across the table and put my hand over his. He's 33 years old, and he's taller than me by 2 inches, and he has his mother's cheekbones. And in that moment, I saw every age he'd ever been sitting in front of me at once. "You and I are always okay," I said. "That's not conditional." He looked at his hands. She isn't a bad person, Dad. He stopped. I didn't fill in the silence. "That wasn't my job. I'm sorry," he said finally. "For all of it." "I know you are," I said. "Now go back to your wife. It's your wedding day." He looked at me a moment longer. Then he stood up, and he hugged me the way he used to when he was small arms all the way around, no space between. I held on longer than I usually would. Then he went back across the room, and I watched him go. I found out 2 weeks later how Nicole reacted when she learned about the trust. Daniel called me. He was outside his office. I could tell from the street sounds, and his voice was the flat tone people use when they're keeping themselves controlled by concentration. She had found out through her own attorney she'd apparently consulted one before the wedding, trying to understand what options she would have, legally, regarding the property. The attorney did a routine title search and found that the deed was no longer in my name alone but held in trust, an irrevocable trust, filed the morning after the rehearsal dinner. The timing was not subtle, and Nicole had apparently understood its meaning immediately. Daniel said there had been a very difficult conversation. He said Nicole felt that I had been deliberately hostile to their financial future. He said she used the word sabotage. I listened carefully to everything he said. Then I said, "Daniel, I want to ask you something, and I'd like an honest answer." He said, "All right. Did your wife ever discuss with you before last Friday what she intended to do with that property if I signed the deed over?" A pause. "She said it made sense to develop the waterfront," he said. "The developer offers." "I know the offers," I said. "I've received 2 of them. I declined both." Another pause. "She said that was short-sighted," he said slowly, in the tone of someone starting to hear themselves say something out loud for the first time. I let that sit there between us. "I built that place with my hands," I said. "Your mother and I raised you out there. Her last good summer was on that dock. I declined those offers because no number is worth what that place is. I thought you understood that." His silence stretched long enough that I heard the street sounds change. "I did understand that," he said. "I do. The trust protects it," I said. "For you, for your children if you have them. The land stays in our family. That's all I wanted. That's all it was ever about." He was quiet for another moment. Then, "I should have handled this differently from the start." "We all should have," I said. "That's done now. What happens from here is what matters. I won't tell you that things became easy after that, because that would be false, and I have no interest in false comfort. The year following the wedding was hard for my son and his wife, in ways that I watched from a careful distance. The trust became a persistent point of grievance, and there were other grievances too, some of which had nothing to do with me and everything to do with 2 people discovering what they actually wanted from a life together. I don't know everything that passed between them, and it isn't mine to know. What I know is that Daniel started calling me more. Little calls. Not about anything in particular, asking how the dock was holding up, whether I'd replaced the section of fencing along the north property line, whether the largemouth bass were still running in the early morning the way they had when he was a teenager. I answered every question. I told him the dock had one plank I'd been meaning to replace for a year. I told him the fence was fine. I told him the base were still there, still running in the blue-gray light before 7, and that if he ever wanted to come up and see for himself, the invitation was open. He drove up in March, about 5 months after the wedding. Came on a Friday, said he'd stay through Sunday. He arrived at dusk, and I had a pot of chili on the stove and the fire going, and he came in and dropped his bag in his old room and sat down at the kitchen table like no time had passed at all. Like he was 12 years old and had just come in from the lake. We didn't talk about Nicole that first night. We ate, and we talked about work and the state of the road on the way up, and whether the old aluminum canoe was still seaworthy. I said, I thought it was, mostly. He laughed. Saturday morning we were up before 6. We took the canoe out in the cold and the still, the water like gray silk, and we paddled out past the point where the willows come down to the water, and we sat there a long while, not saying much. The sun came up over the ridge and lit the whole surface of the lake gold, and a great blue heron went past low and unhurried, and my son put his paddle across his knees and looked at all of it. Mom used to say this was the best hour of the day, he said. She was right, I said. He was quiet a moment. I've been doing a lot of thinking, he said. I waited. About what I want. He looked down at the water. About what I thought I wanted and what I actually want. He turned the paddle in his hands. About whether I've been making my own choices or just he stopped. Just going along. I didn't offer him an answer. It wasn't a question that wanted one. I think I need to figure some things out, he said. That sounds right, I said. We paddled back in silence. The good kind of silence. The kind that has companionship in it. We had eggs and toast on the porch in the cold morning and watched a woodpecker work on the dead birch at the edge of the property. He laughed once at something the woodpecker did. A genuine laugh. The one I've been listening for since he was small. He left Sunday afternoon. He hugged me at the truck and held on a beat longer than usual. I'll be back in a few weeks, he said, if that's okay. I told him he didn't need to ask permission. This place would be his someday. He could come whenever he wanted. He got in the truck. He sat there a moment, window down, looking at the cabin, looking at the water beyond it. You built something real here, Dad, he said. I looked at the cabin, too. The south wall in the afternoon light, the picture window catching the sky. 30 years of my hands in every board and beam and piece of trim. We did, I said. He nodded. He put the truck in gear. I stood in the driveway and watched him drive out until I couldn't see the dust from the road anymore. Then I went back to the porch and sat in the chair I'd built the summer after Margaret passed, the one with the wide arms she would have liked, and I looked at the lake, and I let the quiet be quiet. This is what I want you to understand, if you take anything from what I've told you. I didn't win anything that night in the parking lot. I didn't beat anyone. What I did was protect something that didn't belong to me alone. It belonged to my son, too, whether he understood it in that moment or not, whether the woman he married ever understood it or not. I protected it the only way I knew how, with patience and paperwork and one phone call to a man who's been my friend for 50 years. The developer sent a third letter in January, offered me significantly more than the previous 2 letters. I read it, folded it carefully, and put it in the same drawer as the first 2. That lake was there before I came to it. It will be there after I'm gone. The cabin will stand for a long time if my son takes care of it, and I think he will. I think when the rest of this settles and he finds his footing again, he will drive up that road on a Friday evening and let himself in and put a pot of something on the stove and sit at the table where he grew up sitting. I think he'll take the canoe out in the early morning and watch the heron and hear his mother's voice and the sound of the water. I think he'll understand then what I built it for. I think he already does. I didn't raise my voice. I didn't have to. The things that last, the things that are truly worth having, don't require you to shout about them. They just require you to show up every time, with your hands and your patience and the willingness to do the hard, slow work of building something that will outlast you. That's all I ever tried to do. That's enough.